This podcast is sponsored by Teens and Youth in Leadership, CYIL Africa, an organization that is committed to raising generations of young leaders across Africa. Our programs include leadership education, leadership fellowship, research training, webinars, and conferences. Stay informed of our programs by following us on LinkedIn at CYIL and at CYIL Africa on Instagram.
Hello, my name is Israel Idari. I'm a social scientist and a pragmatist. As a social scientist, my research is focused on understanding how youth develop leadership to make social change within their communities and immediate environment. I'd like to invite you to this podcast where I interview and have conversations with scholars and practitioners on their perspective on leadership, followership, and social change. I hope you truly learn from this podcast. Have fun. Hello, today I'm with Dr. Ruth Sims. Dr. Ruth Sims is an expert on effective followership and leadership. She's a director, a researcher, and senior consultant. I'm so happy to have you here today, Ruth.
Oh, really delighted to be talking with you, Israel. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I hope so. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you. Yes, doing well. Just starting the year, getting things planned for the rest of the year.
So I know you're speaking with me from Australia. Can you tell me a little bit about Australia? I've never been there before, but I want to just know what Australia is like in terms of, demographic, in terms of the culture and, the weather there.
Okay. Well, it's summer here at the moment, so the weather's pretty good. In terms of the culture, look, it has some similarities to the US, although when I visit the States, I'm reminded that they are different places. We tend, certainly in organisations, it's quite funny because on the one hand, Australians would say that they're quite egalitarian. And they would say there's not much power difference between managers and staff members, for example. But organisations tend to be quite structured and people will know where they are in an organisational hierarchy. So you've got that interesting tension there between organisational structure but people expecting to be treated as individuals. So in that respect, we probably fall a bit between the Scandinavian countries, which I suspect would be more egalitarian, and maybe the US, which might be a little more hierarchical. We sort of sit in between those two, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. So here in the US, we're in the winter period and it's extremely cold. I know you mentioned that it's morning over there. It's 7 p.m. here. So that's huge difference in terms of, location. All right. So I first got to know about your work while I was a PhD student and I was trying to gather resources, materials about followership. And I was really impressed. I was inspired by your thoughts, your perspective about followership, and how much commitment you place, not just in followership research, but in practice. How did your passion for followership begin?
Oh, look, there's a few different answers to that. I'll give you a personal answer and I'll give you a professional answer because I think they play together a little bit. So as a child, I moved around a lot because of my father's work. I was born in the UK, so we moved from England to Australia. We moved between states in Australia, and I think that made me very good at being the person who was new, but also working out what was going on in terms of what was happening socially. How do you join a new group? So I suspect those very early experiences made me interested in how groups of people work. So my parents, again, from when I was very young, quite an egalitarian approach. So pretty strong dose of Sunday school. I was a regular Sunday school attendee. But along with that was a sense that regardless of position, everybody's important. And I think that really followed through into how I saw workplaces, that people's formal role and even doing jobs that are seen as being not terribly, not having high status, really important to the workings of the organisation. So I think that came quite young as well. More recently, when I was thinking about doing PhD studies, which I've only completed relatively recently. So I graduated in 2023, and that question, what will I do? My work experience had quite recently been in a unit within a university. The leader of that unit changed regularly for all sorts of reasons, many of them not very good reasons. It was like a revolving door. The senior leader was not a good leader, and yet the work of the unit went really well. So we were still doing all the things we needed to do. And so it just occurred to me that what organisations say about the importance of leaders as individuals and leadership, if that was all true, we shouldn't have been able to do the work that we were doing. There had to be more to it than that. So I thought, what's the opposite of leadership? Followership. Discovered I wasn't the first person to have thought about this, which is probably good if you're doing a PhD. You don't want to be the very first. And read a bit about it and thought this is just absolutely fascinating, and decided that that's where I was going to concentrate my studies and now my work.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that experience. So when you talk about followership, particularly in the country you're from, when you tell people you teach about followership, you talk about followership, what is the reception like?
It varies. So occasionally I get people telling me that that's not a thing, doesn't exist. Which is curious. so very definitely think it does. People who I talk to and who I do work with, they're curious about it. It's not necessarily a term they've heard before. So December last year, quite recently, I was able to attend the Leadership Development Summit in Canberra, and that was a national gathering of people who are really interested in leadership development. And I was invited to give a short presentation on followership, and that was a really great audience to have that conversation with. They were interested because they're already thinking about leadership differently, in a more contemporary way than some other organisations and people. But even for some of them, it was the first time they'd heard the term. And so they were saying, oh, that was really interesting. I'd never heard followership before. So it is still new. Leadership is definitely better understood. But the folk that I work with, as soon as I start talking about leadership and followership not being opposed to each other, but working together, leadership actually being leadership and followership working together. We just don't have some very good language for it. The folk who are interested in working with me and finding out more, they're really interested in that, because they're not wanting to do leadership in that really traditional hero leader, knowing all the answers, working alone. That kind of model of leadership isn't working for them. So they're curious about something else.
I remember vividly in the last Global Followership Conference in the United States here, you were in a panel session and someone asked you a question and mentioned that how have you sold followership to the corporate world? We know that, followership more than ever has a negative connotation compared to leadership. But then, how exactly have you been able to create the identity of someone who promotes followership within the corporate system?
I think my answer when I was asked that question on the panel was to say I used flattery. And that is somewhat true. I mean, when you're talking to people, you encourage them to think about doing something that their peers might not be doing. You encourage them to go, look, you're already ahead of the game on this, or you wouldn't be talking to me about it. So there is I was being a little silly when I said, flattery gets you everywhere. But it is about connecting with people and their desire to be doing something different, and to recognize that in them. Just talking about the need for people to be working better together in organizations, everybody just nods. Everyone has situations where if only they could get these two teammate members to work better together, or they have a problem team member, or everyone's got an issue that they would like to solve when it comes to those interpersonal working relationships. Someone who just won't do what the manager needs to be done is often the way they come at this. And then to say, well, looking at followership, looking at the manager's behaviour as well as the staff members, how do we work well together? That tends to be of interest to people, because people in organisation, they want to work well together. Nobody wants to do hardly anybody goes to work wanting to do a bad job. People are doing the best they can with what they've got, and giving them a followership perspective and some really practical ways of how do you do leadership and followership better, both in your role but enabling other people to do it better as well. That gets really practical for people.
So in a nutshell, you don't speak about followership derogating leadership.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I do make the point that I think on my website I used to say leadership enough already. Like we don't we probably have talked about that enough. We need to start talking about followership. Both are important. So it's not, but absolutely, leadership's important in organizations, without a doubt. You don't have one without the other.
Thank you. So I know it's a popular statistics that organizations, corporations invest billions of dollars annually in leadership development. Now, why do you think organizations need to start focusing on followership development?
Well, there seems to be pretty good evidence that all the money that's been spent on leadership development hasn't got the outcomes that we were hoping for.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of reasons for that, and people like David Day, others talk about the need for it to be systemic rather than focusing just on individual skill development, although I think skill development is really helpful. But if we think about leadership and followership, I mean, those two, I think Mary Orban has said she doesn't use those terms except together anymore. She talks about leadership followership now because you can't have the one without the other. So when we talk about leadership followership, honestly, it's a little bit early to know whether followership development is whether investment in followership development is going to give the dividends that we hope for. It's too early. We don't know that yet. But I go back to the working well together. If we're looking at ways of encouraging, helping, equipping people to work well together with each other, that's got to have benefits. It can't not. I also think that the leadership development industry, if you like, the focus on leadership being something that special people do, to less special people, often against less special people's wills. I mean, I'm stretching it, but that tends to be the tone of some of that leadership development work. I think that doesn't work well for leaders. It puts an awful lot of pressure on individuals to be something they can't be. Organisations are too big, too complicated for single individuals to be able to do all of that alone. We have to work together. And if we start doing that, we can't all be leading all the time, because that doesn't make sense. So followership, it has to be in the mix. And I think organizations are starting to see that.
Yeah, so I have a question that can be quite controversial. Many people have said, followership, but I struggle with trying to understand the difference between followership and being, being a subordinate. The difference between followership and team science, the difference between followership and, employees. So how do you define followership? What's your personal philosophy?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. I would say that there's two different ways that certainly in the academic space we've thought about followership, and I think that spills over into how we talk about followership in organizations as well. One is really looking at the structure and the role and saying, okay, it reflects an organizational hierarchy. So the manager is the leader, the staff member is the follower. I would say that although that can sometimes be the case, leadership and followership actually isn't attached to your organizational role. It's much more fluid than that. People lead and follow all the time. So we've all had managers who haven't been good leaders. So I think that connection between management and leadership, we've already broken that a little bit. So the connection between follower and subordinate, again, it doesn't always stack up. So I would say that followership, and the definition that I tend to use, is the active contribution of someone to the leadership process and to the leadership relationship when they're not being the leader, when they're doing the flip side of that. Now, that doesn't mean they're never the leader. They probably are. In any relationship, healthy relationship, it ebbs and flows. And I think that removes it from the structure. Sometimes the structure echoes it, but not necessarily. We say that, leadership can be anywhere in an organization. We encourage everyone to be leaders. I think exactly the same is true of followership. The trick is to know when to lead and when to follow, and to be able to move between the two so that you're doing what's effective at that moment with the person you're working with for the outcomes that the organisation is trying to achieve.
Yeah, thank you so much for that definition. The act of contributing to a leadership process. That reminds me of a research that I conducted with Dr. Eric Hoffman of Virginia Tech. So we had this research where we're trying to understand how people perceive followership, and we identified, three themes from our data collected. What the first one was, maintaining. People identified that, followership, or sometimes followers would prefer to want to maintain a structure. They want to maintain a particular rule, a particular guiding policy that governs an organization. Then the second thing that we got was reframing. We saw that some followers would want to, support the leader to reframe or restructure an organization. This time around, the follower is supporting the leader. But there is the third one, which is transforming, which means that even if it means that a follower is going against the leader, they want to really transform an organization. And it also reminds me of Ira Shalev's, popular use of words, which he will say standing for and standing to a leader. I really love your definition, and it's actually speaks to the fact that sometimes followers would support, and other times they can stand against. Do you believe that this is practical in an organizational setting, standing for and standing against the leader?
I do. I think it depends what the follower is following. And this is not based on research that I've published. This is a bit of a hunch. So I'm going out there at the moment. The research that I have published identifies core followership behaviours without which followership isn't happening. So that's deferring to the leader, letting them lead, and supporting the leader. And some of those supportive things are seen as quite proactive and are sometimes labelled as leadership, but I don't think they necessarily are. So you've got those core things. You've got other things that followers do that from an academic perspective are not followership. They're organisational citizenship behaviour or their voice. But in a workplace where people are working together, people don't care about those distinctions. It's seen as followership. Now, what I think can happen and what I suspect is going on where managers say, oh, so-and-so won't follow, or and they have a problem with that. It may be that they're not being effective followers. That could be true. Or it may be that they're not following the leader. They're following an idea or possibly a greater good. It might be that follower doesn't think what the leader is doing is actually achieving the goals that the organisation should be about. So they've withdrawn their followership from that individual. They're following something or someone else. When I did my research, I interviewed a number of people in the public sector, so they know about organisational hierarchy. But when I asked followers to think about a leader, quite often they'd say, I'm not thinking about my manager. I'm not thinking about my proper leader. So they were making a distinction between the relationship with their manager and who they saw as a leader and someone they wanted to follow. So although it can be frustrating for the manager when they see that discrepancy, it may be that the follower is doing exactly what they ought to be doing.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughts. Another question I have is with regards to leadership skills versus followership skills. Many people would say that some leadership skills include negotiation, communication, problem solving. And I've seen studies that say that, some followership skills also, require negotiation, communications, and problem solving. Do you think there's a way we can separate leadership skills from followership skills?
Look, I think very often the skills are the same, but they're employed a bit differently. So when you're communicating in, for a moment, the leader role, you will be wanting to be clear. You will be wanting to provide direction. I think in return, some of the things that I identified as core followership is following direction, but not following blindly. So you've got a broader understanding of the context. And then if you're supporting the leader by challenging them, asking questions, either for clarification, am I doing this right? Is this what you wanted? Or in a more sometimes called proactive way, are you sure this is the right thing to do? What about this piece of information? Do you know? And this is the follower doing this. We quite often see that and go, oh, they're showing leadership. But I don't think that's necessarily in the follower's mind. They're doing that in order to be an effective follower, to provide the leader with the information, advice that they need to lead well. So it's not that the skills are necessarily different. I think the intent might be different. And if the skills are not different, then what becomes important is knowing when to employ those skills well. So are you leading or are you following? Is it helpful to be questioning, or have we got to a point in the process where now we need agreement and you can live with it? It may not be the decision that you would make if you were the leader, but you're not being the leader at the moment. So if it doesn't go against your ethics, if it's okay, maybe it's okay to go along and you do that, even if it's not exactly how you would go about it. So it's knowing whether you're in the leader or follower role at a particular moment as well. There's also some of the things that we talk about and we call good leadership is just actually being a decent human being. And it doesn't, regardless of whether you're at work or not, what your role is at a particular moment. Some of that stuff about communication and care and listening, all really important, but they're people skills. They're not necessarily leadership skills.
I think my final question would be, how do you think we can promote the field of followership, both in practice and in research?
Look, I think to keep writing and talking and publishing about it, I think it's really important not to get too narrow about what followership is or isn't. It's still a relatively new area of study. So my view, and I know it's not universally shared, but my view would be there's a number of different ways of thinking and looking at followership. I think what's important is to be, and especially in an academic context, but also when we're working in a professional context, to be really clear about what we mean by followership for this moment. I think defining our terms, defining our constructs, really, really important. But that's not to say there's only one way of looking at this. I think just as in leadership, there's a variety of ways of looking and thinking about leadership. I think there can be a variety of ways of looking and thinking about followership. I think that openness is really helpful. Some will be demonstrated over time to be more useful than others. That's how research works. That's how practice works. Some things work in practice, some don't. But I do think it's really, really important for us to be very clear about what assumption, and I'm using the word assumptions. I don't mean that pejoratively. What assumptions we're bringing, what beliefs we're bringing. This is how we're constructing our view of followership. This is the lens that we're looking through, and this is what we see, which means a different lens might see something slightly different. That's okay. But both that openness and clarity together, I think, is going to serve us well.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It's been a pleasure speaking with you about the subject of followership today.
I've really enjoyed it too. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Before you leave, I would like to ask you a question that is non-followership related. And that is, if you're not teaching followership, if you're not teaching leadership, if you're not doing serious work, what do you enjoy doing?
Oh, well, I'm going to go and see a movie this afternoon. I'm giving myself the afternoon off to go to the movies. I like film. I like reading. I'm a big reader, mainly fiction. I hardly ever read non-fiction. I certainly don't read leadership books. I really like music. So there's a big music festival coming up in March. WOMAD is on. It's one of the WOMAD festivals. I'm going to be there all 4 days. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Sounds exciting. Well, for me, I'm still trying to learn how to read fictional books because I just completed a PhD program. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why. But then I think that's one of my goals to start enjoying the non-academic books.
Yeah.
Well, it's really nice speaking with you, and I'm grateful for your time, and I look forward to having future conversations with you.
Look, thanks, Israel. It's been a lot of fun. All the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the Future of Leadership podcast today. If you are here to kindly share, subscribe, leave a review, and follow us across our social media platforms, including Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, all at TYIL. See you in the next episode.